if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to ask for some milk. When you give him the milk, he will probably ask for a straw. When he's finished, he'll ask you for a napkin. Then he'll want to look in the mirror to make sure he doesn't have a milk mustache. Remember that book? How many of you do? Okay. Of course, it is entitled that, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, written by Laura Numeroff and illustrated by Felicia Bond. The quintessential book, I think, of the 1990s, 2000s, maybe even beyond that. And I'm not sure, are the young parents reading that to their kids? Yes? Okay, so it lives on. Now, reading online comments about this book was pretty enlightening for me. And if you're curious, all you need to do is in the search bar, type the name of the book. If you give a mouse a cookie, and you'll find amazing things. I had no idea that there were so many ways to interpret the meaning of this book. So one article I read was entitled, A Deconstruction of If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, or How Millennials Became Millennials. All right? Yeah, written by a millennial. He said, I am one, but you know. So the writer, Mark Snedeker, says, millennials were told, now this is him saying, I don't know this, but millennials were told, the mouse is you. Is that true? Anyway, you don't have to answer that. I found that article a fascinating read. You can read it for yourself. I'm not going to offer my opinion on what he wrote about it. But something that becomes clear quite quickly when reading this book is how something rather simple like asking for a cookie can grow and grow and grow until the subsequent events really can hardly be traced to the initial request. So it fits a certain collective mindset. We're conditioned to think growth. One thing leads to another, and anything less than that, maybe a little suspect. There's always more. There's progress, expansion. One thing leads to another to the point where we continually get more and more desirable outcomes. So another word for that could, I guess, be success. And success is a good thing, right? Why wouldn't we want to consider anything less than success? Failures are tolerated only in so far as they lead you to further success. After all, what's making the headlines? If you're paying attention to the news or social media over the past few months, there's one name that keeps coming up. It's Elon Musk. There are others, but that one definitely. And regardless of what you think of Mr. Musk, he is characterized as extremely successful. You can find a variety of iterations, actually, of his bio online. Did you know that? Many different ones. Interesting. In fact, I sometimes think that a new book of If You Give a Mouse a Cookie could actually be written about his life. And if any takers are here, that might be a lucrative business. But we are surrounded with messages of success and more and expansion all the time and at all cost. There are specific definitions of these concepts that we too have embraced. Either we've done it consciously or by osmosis. A common understanding of success means we have to push, pursue, elbow, scramble. But whatever we do, we can't look weak. We can't lose. Right. Definitely cover up those weaknesses and recast those failures as a platform to catapult you into another successful level. So the path to the good life is filled with falling and getting up again. Failing fast, hopefully, and turning failures into more successes. So does that strike you as exhausting or life-draining? How far can we go, after all? Do we keep rising? Can our standard of living increase unimpeded indefinitely? How about the GDP? Is there an absolute top rung to that ladder? And would we recognize that? And what exactly is that success that we relentlessly pursue? Those who study history know that economies, societies, and empires can expand and grow for only so long. The same holds true for other organizations and for family dynasties and other things like that. The time ultimately does come when these systems implode. The variables which are unexpected or uncontrollable, such as a global pandemic or natural catastrophes, can topple structures quickly. A little bit like a Jenga block tower. One too many of those stabilizing blocks has been removed, bringing down the entire, sometimes very elaborate structure. But what if going down instead of constantly climbing is really the goal? Some years ago, I read a book by Chris Rock and Joel Van Dyke entitled Geography of Grace. No, not that Chris Rock. Different one. Anyway, the premise of this book can be summed up with the author's statement, and I quote, "Grace is like water. It flows downhill and it pools up in the lowest places." Reading this book was transformative to me. It's a very readable theological description of what we do with Jesus, what that looked like, and how that's played out in everyday life. It's not about climbing up, but it's about consciously going down. Our text from Philippians that Amy read is exactly like that. Second chapter of Philippians. Look at a few choice words and phrases here. Common purpose and common mind. No competition, no conceit. Be humble. Value others. Think of the interests of others before your own. Now, before we critique these concepts as being completely anti-self-care or overly pious, remember this. This was written to describe Jesus. The writers of the letter to Philippians, which is the Apostle Paul and his mentee, Timothy, they wanted to be certain that the Christ followers didn't get off on some ego or personal fulfillment trip. That's why they urged their readers to unity. Unified in conviction and unified in love. Unity takes work. It requires time. Takes as much listening as speaking and a very liberal dose of compromise. In addition to unity, this group of Christ followers is urged not to compete, to avoid conceit, and to be humble. Now think about your profession or your relationships. How easy is it to give up measuring yourself according to someone else's standards? How easy? They have more friends. Oh my goodness, their social media is doing better than mine. Oh, they're making more money. Look at that, they got that promotion. So we're always comparing ourselves to someone else. How easy is it really to think of yourself and your abilities sanely? To be realistic, be clear about your skills, your strengths, your gifts, as well as your weaknesses and your shortcomings. Now, humility isn't about acting less than or taking on airs of inferiority or shrugging off a compliment and saying, it's nothing. It's about being sane about who you are. This isn't only a message for young people, in case we're wondering. Older people are not immune to trying to put on a good front so that others will think well of them or us, or think of us at all. Young people are not the only ones who inflate their persona to get ahead, to gain position. Older people do this too. If we cultivate a sane view of self, and it takes very deliberate cultivation, given what our culture demands of us, but if we cultivate that sane view, we'll be in a better position to value other people, not by telling them what they want to hear, or what may influence them in how they see us, but truly by knowing people well enough to be able to support them in who they are and to be in a position to value their unique gifts. That doesn't happen overnight. It takes effort. It takes time and a consistent focus on what's important. Imagine what thinking of the interests of others before your own would look like on a national or an international stage. Would we be able to pass comprehensive gun reform? Or take decisive action to avert or at least slow catastrophic climate crisis? Or look at the global food shortage through fresh eyes so a bold foreign policy can be crafted? Could we? We see hints, but we don't see nearly enough. Let me remind you, there is no party and no single politician who has a comprehensive and completely altruistic agenda. But we have to look at those who can be pressed to do the most good. When we work for causes that reflect care for those living in tenuous situations and trapped in food deserts, locally or internationally, for example, we open the way for grace to flow to the lowest places. When we ask, how can we alleviate or relieve the torture imposed on the most vulnerable following a rollback of human rights and a rapid increase in restrictions, we're turning our eyes away from our own privilege and to another's plight. When we practice charity, but quickly move to solidarity and listen to people's real experiences, their fears, their hopes, we're placing ourselves in the space where grace pools. Pay attention. Create movement. Recognize the moment. Attention precedes action. Mindfulness becomes motivation. A moment metamorphoses into a movement. The place where grace pools can become our natural habitat, but it will not happen without confronting what's at stake here. If we take the life of Christ as a model, as suggested in this text, success is not what we think. If we regard success as synonymous with money, influence, power, even aggression, well, then we see a lot of examples of very successful people around the world. Many of the same people are the ones who oppress and disregard those who live where the grace pools. The citizens of African and other countries impacted as grain from Ukraine is being bombed, blocked, and plundered by Russia, for example. Hunger and food prices will spike around the globe. This is not success. This is bullying. Those powerful and wealthy people who hold public office and heap derision and scorn on a 10-year-old rapist-impregnated child are not successful. They are power-maddened bullies whose goals are to control those who live where the grace pools. Now, before we become self-righteous, let's be quick to recognize we don't easily or naturally land in this place of grace. It's a vulnerable space, a place marked by insecurity. It holds no prestige or outward honor, but there is grace. And grace will connect us to so much more than we think. There's something else at stake here. If you pay attention to the rather humorous storyline of If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, and this whole series actually, it may strike you that the mouse is rather self-centered. In fact, the mouse needs the small human, that second protagonist or deuteragonist, to carry out all of their whims and requests. Cleaning up after them, doing without, becoming uncomfortable, and quite exhausted. All for this tiny, tiny, cute dictator. On closer inspection, successful people such as Elon Musk and many others leave a host of these servants in the wake of their unbridled ambition as well. Employees, business associates, partners, even their own children. These egocentric people dot the landscape. It's not difficult to spot them if you pay attention. If we choose to move down to where people live and the grace pools, there won't be servants or slaves, just community. Mutual respect and sharing, caring for the most vulnerable. Success is not what you think. If we'd like to see ourselves as a protagonist in the story of grace, success will look like those rallying to demand rights for the most vulnerable. It will be working relentlessly to hold public officials accountable. It will be having our eyes open to recognize our own opportunities, like we heard in Amy's story this morning. We can always find reasons to continue pushing and pursuing, climbing, bullying, and using other people for our own purposes. There are a lot of examples for that. If we resolve to follow the downward trajectory of Christ to the place where grace pools, our success will not be heralded or recognized. We know that meaning really isn't connected with more. Purpose has little in common with pursuit. Grace shows up in places very few can grasp. But watch for it. Create it. Celebrate it. Amen.